Hey guys, it's Khalil. Starting our third episode now on the roundtables that we started for again, for the channel here, Marshals of Truth. This time, we are starting off on the oh well, first I want to introduce our guests here. We have Alex again. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Alex. You may have seen me in the discussion about Rome, and I'm happy to be back.
And Kanoa, why don't you introduce yourself? Just say like your name, last name, which school you're going to, major, and then anything else you want to mention.
Yeah, no, for sure. Hey guys, I'm Kanoa Shim-Ly. I am a first year chemistry student here at the University of Washington, Seattle campus. I went to middle school with both of these guys. So they're my really great friends, and excited to be here. Yeah.
All right. So Um, we are all here today, and we also have another friend of ours that couldn't be here today, but hopefully he can make it for another time, Liam. But you might see him later. But one thing that all four of us have in common as far as our knowledge of like all the topics, that the Marches of Truth goes through is military history. There are a lot of other things that we can speak on, but military history is something that all of us seem to have the strongest understanding of. We can really speak very broadly and strongly about it. This time, though, we wanted to talk about D-Day, and as is the same, as I try to do with a lot of these topics, I like to ask questions about things that you probably already took for granted to be true. Just to kind of, wouldn't really want to call it myth busting, but just kind of questioning. Like D-Day has always, at least in the West, been interpreted as an event that that World War II is known for. It's it that it really showed the U.S. involvement in World War II and that it helped win the war. It was a decisive factor in winning the war, as it is interpreted here in the West. But as all of us understand, um, there are certain aspects of World War II, like with the Eastern Front and the Soviets fighting the Nazis, that and the other Axis forces that make us question that narrative that D-Day was so crucial to winning World War II. So with this episode, we'd like to really ask the question, did D-Day matter? Not and with this we want to be more broad even, just to kind of, make sure we're covering all of our bases and because it's fun. We aren't just going to talk about World War II. We're going to go a little further. But why don't we just start with World War II and really see, did D-Day matter?
Yeah, did it matter is a very big question. I think it did and it didn't, and in some aspects, and it really depends on what you mean by did it really matter. So there are multiple aspects to war in general. There's the actual tactics of it. Was it practical? Did it help achieve an end? There's the social, and then there's also the cultural aspects of it. Since half of a war is sort of putting up a front and making it seem like you're winning, to inspire faith in your armies and in your people. And sorry. I definitely think that with D-Day there was definitely a sort of flashy aspect to it. It was sort of there was definitely a statement behind it. It wasn't exactly just a maneuver that the Allies used to achieve the ends of defeating the Germans in the actual war. It was also to defeat them socially, to sort of be able to mark a point as we do where the tides really did turn and where Europe was now being invaded by the Allies. So I think it was used definitely as a statement.
In that same sort of vein, I guess, especially like kind of in the context of the war itself, right? From that general timeline of, September 1939 to 19 I think it was like August 1945 or something. There's definitely a lot of ramifications that D-Day had on it. I feel like that was sort of the turning point in where the United States started to really push for an all-out victory, if that makes sense, on both the Atlantic and the Pacific fronts, where you see the island hopping campaign has been brutal in the Pacific, and suddenly we're pushing that with new force around the same time. The invasion for D-Day has been sort of ramping up, including that, those whole deception tactics, leading up to the actual Normandy beach landings. So I definitely agree with Alex that it's a lot. It has a ramification inside the war itself, but it also has multiple ramifications outside of the war. And I think we'll get to that later. But just to touch on that, it's more of like every war has propaganda, and propaganda used effectively can be another ally in your war against someone else. And that's to generate public opinion. And so I think that the way that D-Day was used as like this big offensive front, as Alex said, was to make a statement and was to get more support behind the war effort. And that's what eventually fueled, in my opinion, the Allied victory in the end, because everybody was behind that move.
Right. And another thing that is lost in the public memory of World War II in America is that D-Day was not the first American offensive, military action against the Nazis. There was the operation. I believe it was called Operation Torch, maybe Operation Crusade. Might be getting those names wrong. It's one of them. But it was the Anglo-American invasion of North Africa, and where they were going to aid mainly British Commonwealth troops that were defending the Suez Canal in Egypt from German and Italian forces trying to take that objective by attacking them from the west and pushing from both sides so that the Nazis and the Italians would be pushed out of the continent entirely. And in this effort, although it took a few months, it began in November 1942, which, considering the logistics involving the U.S., a superpower that was thousands of miles away from the European theater fighting, um, training troops, bringing supplies over, bringing the necessary military equipment is probably around the earliest that the U.S. could have acted, and it did act in a crucial way, pushing, I believe it was 300,000, 500,000 troops potentially out of the conflict in POW, killed or captured, killed or wounded. Um, and then there was the invasion of Sicily with Operation Mincemeat. America very much was involved in the military operation to secure Sicily, and then very soon after the invasion of southern Italy, which helped to turn Italy into an ally. The fascist the fascist government was deposed as a result of that action, and Mussolini I believe was even brought over into a POW prison as he was ousted out of power. And so the D-Day was not the first action of America. And we know we're not just talking about America. D-Day was a joint effort by much of the Western allies. But when we're talking about America, more specifically, it wasn't the first action. And so there were a lot of things that the U.S. was already doing to weaken the Nazis that helped aid the Soviets on the Eastern Front, which is another aspect of this. I mean,
I need to think about this a lot more.
there are
Yeah.
a lot of dimensions to this. And this is one thing that I really like about these discussions is that there are very few times in a classroom where you're thinking this hard, unless it's like a final and you're trying to learn while taking the test. You know that feeling?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think we all do.
But yeah, I mean, it's
but I
kind of
think
like D-Day wasn't. I mean, the point I'm trying to make is that I don't think D-Day, although it did have an effect, there were already so many things that the U.S. and the other Western allied powers in World War II were already doing before D-Day to weaken the Axis alliance, put Mussolini out of power, um, 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 basically rack up hundreds of thousands of Axis casualties and POW killed or wounded um, to to make the Soviet advances, counter offensives in the East easier. So like we all hear about the Eastern Front and about how Operation Barbarossa looked to have almost been a success since they were so close to Moscow. Some contingents were within 15 miles of the Kremlin. And that was a very scary thing. But then we hear about the American Lend-Lease being brought over, another form of aid that wasn't necessarily the sort of military operation that D-Day was, that helped give the Soviets the supplies needed to be able to push the Nazis back during the winter 200 miles away from the city. And then the next year, when the Nazis and the Italians and the Romanians came to try to take the Caucasus, and then Stalingrad was a major obstacle to be able to cut off the resupply route. Um, the defense of the city, and then Operation Uranus, which pushed the shut up, Alex. to
what?
Oh, I saw you grinning. And you Kanoa too. I saw you grinning.
I wasn't grinning, man.
Oh,
I was straight faced until I saw Alex's like smile, and then I just broke up.
how are they gonna call it Operation Uranus? That's crazy. Stalin,
Different time. Let's get back on topic. Different time.
the
Yeah.
operation literally in
No, 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 no. Let's keep it at that.
Okay.
Let's keep going. Let's keep going.
Anyway, you know, yeah. So basically, like the aid that the U.S. offered that allowed the Soviets to be able to marshal their forces, give them the supplies needed, the military supplies needed, to push them back to push the enemies away from their capital in 41, 42 over that winter, and then again in Operation Uranus to push them out of not just Stalingrad, but out of the entire Caucasus region, and then the ability to be able to counterattack in Kursk, which is like much of the Eastern Front, isn't well known to many people when looking at World War II, since we almost always, in the West, we look at D-Day, and we look at maybe Dunkirk and the invasion of Poland, and that's kind of it. But those aspects, the Soviets were putting a lot of the effort on the military ground in fighting, and the West was as well with their invasions of North Africa, Sicily, and then southern Italy. But one thing that needs to be considered as well is that the U.S. and the Western Allies were doing so much in helping the Soviets do what they did by providing them those supplies. There was even a little history documentary series that I saw on Amazon Prime Video. I think it was called World War II in the East, Soviet Storm, and it was made about 10 years ago. And in the way that they described a lot of things, they tried to make Russia look good. So I kind of got the idea that it was like a little bit of propaganda, just trying to like relive the Soviet World War II killing Nazis memory. Um, but there were times when they had to admit that Lend-Lease saved the Soviet Union. So all of that, Lend-Lease, North Africa, Sicily, Southern Italy, all of that, that's not D-Day. D-Day was another additional military operation that the Western Allies decided to take. So was D-Day necessary?
I get what you're saying. That D-Day was just another. It wasn't just another. Well, obviously, it wasn't another tactic. It was one of the largest ground invasions ever produced in world history, obviously. But the fact that we've done so much, to me, it felt like D-Day was the culmination of everything that the Western Allies had done beforehand. It was like it was like in rock concerts where you get that one encore performance before they all head out stage. That's what D-Day felt like to me, at least, where there's a huge build up and then there's that payoff moment, right? And that payoff moment was really big. The one thing and it's not really a disagreement on my part, it's the one thing I have an issue with is like the question of D-Day matter is did D-Day matter, where to me it felt like D-Day did matter. Maybe that's just because it's been ingrained in my head so long as an American that it's like obviously D-Day should matter, but it's also like, well, where would the Allies be without D-Day? What could have they done otherwise, other than to invade France? Like, that's one of the questions I wanted answered in this discussion is if D-Day didn't matter so much, what else could they have done to end the war as quickly as they did afterwards? And not to say that the war did end quickly, it took like another year, but like still, like what could have they done otherwise?
Well,
Yeah, you mentioned you- yeah, thank you. You mentioned the perspective of like it should be important to you as an American, which is absolutely true, but it was also important to the Germans who were standing there on the battlefield because I mentioned this to you guys before the recording, but on YouTube you can find all sorts of these videos which are like German soldier meets British soldier and they're, both 80 something years old now. And they may not have actually met in the war, but they meet each other, decades after the conflict is resolved. And one thing a previous German soldier actually said about D-Day was when he saw the Allies landing at Normandy, he wasn't scared, he felt relieved. So, interestingly enough, there was this sense of relief from some German soldiers because they themselves could also see that such a horrible life-taking conflict was coming to an end. Sort of a moment where fear is the highest, where you're the most scared. But the fact that it was a sense of relief just shows kind of how universally, kind of like, like the encore, like the cherry on top, like in a boxing match, all the small punches and you have the big KO punch. It's just kind of like that, and it's a universal symbol.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, when it comes to D-Day as being like a final slam punch, there is there are two things. Well, really a bunch of things, but that's why I'm taking notes. But anyway, you were talking about the social war that was being fought on the battlefield and also in the newspaper through propaganda. And in some ways, D-Day could be interpreted as being, and although for Americans it wouldn't really matter as much, but definitely in Britain, it would matter as revenge for Dunkirk. You know, for the French, it would be their Reconquista in a way. It's the unity of the West is what it is. It's it's when in Churchill's Never Surrender speech, one of his last words in the speech was in the new world with all its power and might will skip forth to the rescue in the liberation of the old. D-Day is the culmination of that. It's the US skipping forth to the rescue with all their resources, with the aid of Britain and its Commonwealth and its large empire, um, and Britain taking revenge for Dunkirk, being so humiliated that they didn't see the German blitzkrieg coming so fast, and then for the French fighting back on the battlefield, after fighting back on the streets through deception and spying for 4 years in the La Resistance. It's the unity of the West is what it is. And so we talk about the social war, and that's what I really see it as. There is another way that the D-Day matters militarily, but I don't think it's for the sake of winning the war. And if it is, it's not the only thing.
Hmm. That's an interesting point because I think I had that sort of in my mind. I just couldn't articulate it in words. Where, like, when I asked about like what else what else could have happened instead of D-Day, I think I was more alluding to that sort of social aspect of the invasion itself, right? We can assume that there are multiple ways to win a war militarily, right? You don't. There are certain moves that you. There's this. There's certain moves where you have to do to get the public on your side, or to get the public and to get other people on your side. D-Day was one of those moves that could have been done completely different militarily, but I don't think it could have been done as well as it did in a social aspect, right? Because as you alluded to, you had the French, the British, all those different peoples now given new hope in a sort of, right? Because the French resistance has been fighting for what, 4 years now, and with little, with progress, but not a lot of progress. Suddenly, America, Canada, Britain, Australia come through, and you have this wide,
Israel,
this
and then India as
you go,
well, with like
yeah,
their troops that they can provide.
right. So all these different allies invading France as a unified front, and that's that social aspect of, you know, you're on your last legs of fighting, and then this whole new wave of reinforcements comes through. That's got to be a morale booster. I don't know if any other tactic could have done that as effectively as D-Day.
And also, as far as like the unity of the West aspect of the social war, that D-Day was a major component of, it gave the ability, because like one thing that I was thinking as I was saying what I said before is that what benefit is there for the U.S. doing D-Day? The British want revenge from Dunkirk. The French want their country back. without having to negotiate some peace with the Nazis that would carve up a piece of their country. Because you could probably imagine that, as Alex was saying earlier, that it was, and maybe it might have been you, Kanoa, but I think it was Alex, and where D-Day was a forceful move for all-out victory. Even if the Soviets took Berlin by themselves, um, like who's like their army may not have the capacity to keep advancing forward. If the Nazis had that much land in Europe, all of Western Europe, to just continue prepping defense lines, then they could have continued the fight for years afterwards, even if they were running out of oil, even if they were running out of weapons. They still had so many men that were fanatical, that were being led by SS officers that were extreme, to continue in some sort of conventional or even unconventional fight. And so it really was a mark for all out victory. So that the French could have their country back. The British could have revenge from Dunkirk. But for America, it gives them a superhero complex. It gives them the ability to say that we saved you.
I remember you talking about how D-Day could have been the first move of the Cold War, and I feel like that's what you're getting. You said that you explained it in what you just said previously, where if the Soviet Union took Berlin, right? You take essentially most of Germany if you take Berlin. You still have France, you still have Denmark, you still have the Western European countries left to go. Do you have the manpower to defend the Soviet Union and all the other territories you have pushed through to get to Berlin, hold Germany, and then advance farther? You could argue yes, but that would give the Soviet Union the only god complex in the world. And I don't think the United States or Britain, for that matter, or any of the other allied countries really like that. Because the Soviet Union was on the Axis powers to start with, I think, right? And there's that level of distrust there, right? If you find someone who, like I get, the Soviet Union were invaded by Nazi Germany, obviously, like that must cause some, that causes the Soviet Union to join the Ally side. But you would think diplomatically there's still some distrust between the Soviet Union, Britain, the United States, and the rest of the Allies. I think that D-Day was also it wasn't like a master move, but it was like kind of planned out to be like this not the antithesis, but like the counter to the Soviet Union's push against the Germans from the east. It was to show that, okay, the Western Allies are just as powerful as the Soviet Union. And I think that's what at least part of D-Day was about. It was
Yeah,
to show
putting on a
that
better show, right?
it was to show that,
Yeah.
hey, we're as good, if not better than you. And that's what eventually leads into the Cold War. I feel like the Cold War was just like, I don't know how like crude language is monitored on this channel, but
Oh, go ahead.
it was like to me the Cold War, at least the nuclear arms race, was a huge dick measuring contest.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely.
It was who
That's
could
what
build
it is.
who could build the biggest, who could build the biggest
The biggest slightly phallic shaped object. Yeah.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
It was
There was practicality to it, but honestly, like, we have 10 minutes remaining on the meeting, but Going like going to space, for example. Satellites are great. Satellites are a fantastic invention.
Yeah.
Revolutionize things. Exactly. You're holding up your phone. Yeah, exactly. Um, they were a great invention, but people in space, you know, how much of a priority is it really?
Okay, as a STEM student, all I'm saying is that it's
Okay.
pretty damn cool. But I get what
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
saying.
Now, for sure. But it just feels like there are more practical priorities, but there is a big social priority in that people in space are literally above, like quite literally above everyone else. Um, and you mentioned going back to D-Day, sort of, I think it's a coincidence maybe, but it's kind of interesting how the two powers that are on the same side are clamping in from different directions. So that if they were to keep going, then you get a head-on collision. And that's exactly what culminates in the Cold War.
And
That's just a coincidence, but I think that's the type of stuff that I find really cool.
yeah, I mean, both of you guys are talking about like the sort of again like the superhero complex the D-Day that D-Day gives the US, not just to get all of the West on their side, um, but but also to kind of give a little wink over to Stalin, and kind of make sure that he doesn't get all the glory, because sure, it probably seemed like a relatively good idea if you're the U.S. and you're skeptical, or if you're the U.K. and you're Churchill and you're skeptical of Stalin, to just let him and Hitler fight until they die. You know, I'm sure there was some U.S. politician or general that thought about that and was like, why don't we just let them kill each other? Um, but if Stalin and the Soviets were able to win, um, then uh, then then you give them then you give them way too much of an ability to say that they saved the world. And that's why you have Putin nowadays saying Russia saved the world. So you still have voices even today with that idea, um, regardless of the fact that the U.S. provided so much lend-lease aid over to them to allow them to win. I mean, come on. If you're the U.S. and you're some lone senator or general thinking, why don't we just let them kill each other? You'd also, if you hate the Soviets so much, you're gonna get rid of their lend-lease aid too. But if you get rid of their lend-lease aid, then they're probably gonna lose. And if you let them lose, then the Nazis are probably going to get the Caucasus oil. And if they get the Caucasus oil, they may well become unstoppable. So it's a balancing act, is what it is. You have to pick one, is what you do. If you're the US, if you're the UK, you have to pick one, the Soviets or the Nazis. And they picked the Soviets. And so, as much as they hate them, this was the beginning of the Cold War, I say, because they have to deal with this weight, that they just got to carry around, oh, we could have global hegemony with our Western liberal democratic ideas, even imperialist ones, but we still have the Soviets that are going to check us, that are going to annoy us for the next 50 years, and we're just gonna have to deal with it. And that's what I think it really is about, because there was a world in where the U.S. must have hated the Soviets so much that they were going to get rid of Lend-Lease aid because, fuck them. But they could, if they did that, they were gonna give Hitler a victory. And did they really want Hitler to get the Caucasus oil and potentially become unstoppable? No. I mean, we already see how much Russia and Putin today is using energy as a as a as a as a power prop, you know, around the world, globally, not just regionally, but globally. Give Hitler that power. Oh my God. But another thing that I want to mention that the U.S. tried to do failed. But what they tried to do before D-Day, that could have crippled the Nazi war effort was Operation Tidal Wave. You guys ever hear about that? Operation Tidal Wave?
I've definitely heard the name, yeah.
Okay. Well, it was the right after North Africa was secured, 200 bombers from Benghazi airport left to bomb the Romanian airfields of Ploiești. And Ploiești, the Romanian oil field, supplied 50% of Hitler's mechanized army. So the decommissioning um, of that oil field would have crippled the Nazi war effort in such a way that that it would certainly show on the battlefield. And now it failed because it was highly defended, and the U.S. didn't have a whole lot of expectations it would be well defended, and human error. But there was a plan to weaken the Nazis in such a way that it would really show on the battlefield, and again make it easier for the Soviets. And so, like, there are a lot of things other than D-Day that militarily were helping on the battlefield. But I'm sure up until now we'd already mentioned just how important D-Day was, and also how unimportant D-Day might have been considering all the other things that were done. Is there anything more you guys want to add?
No. I think that about sums it up with the whole D-Day being useful both practically and mostly as sort of like a social stance superhero thing. I think sums it up pretty well.
Right.
Yeah, I, yeah, we definitely touched on mostly everything we already outlined. So, um, yeah, that was a good talk.
I mean, there are a couple things that I can think of. Um, we didn't get to really touch on the race to Berlin. And we didn't talk about the Moscow conference and the, what was it? There's something else, but there are a couple things that we could still mention, just of course not in this call. If you guys are down to do another episode and maybe see what Liam has to say about all this, then I'm totally down for that. But
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, sure.
yeah, so we'll figure out the timing of that. But for everyone here, for anyone watching, we're just about done with this episode. And so we'll get back to you with the second episode on Did D-Day Matter?
Oh, can I say one thing real quick?
Yeah.
So as of this filming right now, this is Veterans Day weekend. Veterans Day happened on Friday. And obviously this episode is about D-Day, which was one of the most involved invasions in world history. So we just like to take a time to honor our veterans, honor their service to our country, and honor everyone else that was, unfortunately involved in this terrible conflict, and all conflicts throughout history. So I just like to take a moment to honor those people who have served and who gave the ultimate sacrifice for freedom to our country. So we thank you, and yeah, that's it.
Absolutely. Well said.
And without a further ado, I'm Khalil.
I'm Alex.
I'm Kanoa. Dubs up.
And we are the Marshals of Truth. We'll see you next time.